Welcome to Pete's Property Podcast, brought to you by Buyers and hosted by Pete Wargent, buyer's agent, finance and real estate expert, and all-round property guru, plus published author. Join Pete for 30 minutes as he chats all things property with a new guest each week. Learn practical tips from the movers and shakers in the property industry and well-known personalities sharing their property journeys.
G'day, welcome to this week's podcast with me, Pete Wargent. I'm thrilled today to have a super special guest on the pod, none other than the Reno Queen herself, Jane SlackSmith from Your Property Success. Jane, welcome.
Hello, Peter.
Now, it will take me probably half an hour just to run through your bio. You've done so many different things over the years. Author, media commentator, property coach. I know you've been Mortgage Broker of the Year twice, I think, and also named in the top 10 property experts in Money Magazine, top financial influencers list with Qantas. And I know together with your team at Your Property Success, you help everyday Aussies achieve financial freedom through low risk and accelerated property investment. What have I missed there?
No, you got it all. I forgot half of those.
I was when I was reading through it, do you ever have a moment where you look at your bio and think, wow, I can't believe how much stuff I've done over the past dozen years or so?
I'm a kind of a seize the moment kind of person. So when I see an opportunity in helping someone and they're like, I need to know more about how a first home buyer can think like an investor, I'm like, oh, I'll create the First Home Buyers Show. And so then I've got a whole new podcast or a framework for them to work in. So for me, I don't really look back and think that it's huge. I look at it and go, I can see the people that I've affected and helped through that way. And that's really why I do it. So, yeah, I'm really grateful to be able to give them that opportunity.
Yeah, so just rewinding the clock to before your property days. Now, something we've got in common is that we both worked in the mining industry. I wasn't qualified in the sector as such because I was an accountant, but during the mining boom years, I thought, well, the wages were like double what I could earn in professional services. So it's kind of a no-brainer. And I know you spent some time in your early career as a mining engineer, but certainly from my memory of it, it was a bit of a boys' club back in those days. Maybe it still is. So presumably it was mainly a male domain. And I think I read in your bio you specialised in underground coal mining and an expert in explosives. And the thing is, I was always really claustrophobic. I didn't mind the open cut copper mines, but those underground mines always give me the willies. So tell us a bit about how you got into that and any of the sort of the key lessons or experiences that came out of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up in Dubbo and my dad was a farm manager, so he managed other people's farms. My parents have actually never owned their own home. I've always either been on someone's farm managing it or renting themselves. And so, we came from a very humble background. I guess looking back, you could say that we were not well off or potentially poor, but we never felt that way. We were always had a family of love and happiness, and people always wanted to be at our house, and all the other kids' parents owned homes and ours didn't. It didn't really make a difference. And I guess, the funny thing is, I never really had a sense of social difference or hierarchy or rich people or poor people until, we moved to Dubbo and been there for about 6 months. And this lady came from one of the school friends, came rushing up to Mum and said, gosh, I didn't know you were related to a doctor. I thought you were an ordinary slacksmith. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's a difference between the rich and the poor. And that really was something that sat really against my kind of beliefs, even to now. And, I really feel that there shouldn't be the rich get richer. And so when I had finished school and was looking for a career, I knew that I had to have a scholarship to get into university. And I was really just going to university to learn how to learn. And I was, really kind of good at English and good at maths and physics. And so I remember sitting down with my parents and I applied for like 140 different scholarships and I got one as a mining engineer. So there wasn't this great passion to become a mining engineer or be in the mining industry. And I went into it quite ignorantly because when I turned up, there was 5 girls and 50 guys. And I was like, this is unusual. Like, I didn't expect this. And I came from like an all-girls school. And then the media turned up and said they'd only ever had 5 girls graduate, in the last 20 years. I was like, okay, so this is a bit weird. And then in 1989, I turned up for my first placement at the end of the first year of uni as part of the scholarship conditions. And the miners went on strike. There had never been a woman work underground. It was the first time that it was illegal for women to work underground, and I was completely ignorant to it. So, just being a chatty Jane, everyone kind of warmed to me, and we went about just getting on with it. And because I'd come from a farm, you had to pitch in and drive a tractor for 10 hours and plough a paddock. You did, and so there was no differential between gender of what work you would do. So yeah, I got into it. I graduated as a mining engineer. I started with Exxon, and then I moved after about 10 years to Orica, which was ICI, and became an explosives expert at that stage, for another 10 years as an explosives expert. So every single day I was assessing risk, the consequence and likelihood of something going wrong, which was really the foundation to my property investing. Yeah,
it's interesting. I've got a number of friends who went to Dubbo High, as it was then. I think it may have changed these days. And I always love spending time out there, going to the RSL and the zoo, and it's a great part of the world. And I imagine excellent place to grow up, as you say, real sense of community. My wife, Heather, is actually also from a farming background, and she, exactly like yourself, said the same thing. There was no differentiation between gender, and her dad basically just used to assume that she would drive the tractors and pick the potatoes just the same as the boys. No stereotyping by gender. And even these days, when I can't reverse the car, in a tight spot, I just throw the keys to Heather, and I know, having done all the tractors, I know she can do it. And exactly like you said as well, I think back in her schooling days, there was a certain expectation, even though she went to a grammar school. I just didn't think that females would go on to university. I think Heather won the typing prize at school, which always sort of grated with her because she was one of the most intelligent in the class. So obviously, you've busted through a few ceilings there or stereotypes on the journey on the way through. How did you even get into the idea of things like finance and investing and property, given that your background was that your parents didn't own their farm or their own home?
Looking back on it, when I look at how my relationship with money, my parents didn't have a lot of money, and what they did have went through their fingers. I remember my dad cutting up my mum's bank card back then, and we went to Grace Brothers, and she had memorised the 15-digit number that she just told the person who wrote it down. And so it was kind of, there wasn't a lot of money management or skills. And when I graduated, like you said, in mining, I guess my folks were on like 25 grand a year, and I graduated on 80 grand a year. And so I really had this sense of, I wasn't worthy of the money, right? And so, I helped get my sister through school and through university. And, when I graduated from uni, my friends, couldn't find someone to rent out one of the rooms. And I'm like, well, I come down every weekend from the mines to hang out. I'll rent the room for you. So, I really had this relationship where the money came in and went out. And I remember reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he was saying, do you work for your money or does your money work for you? And that just landed for me. And I was just like, geez, I'm working for my money. It goes out, so I have to go back and work money. There has to be a different way. And around that time, I met my now husband, Todd, 22 years ago. And he'd come over from New Zealand, and he was saying, he had a bit of a lawn mowing business, and he was mowing this guy's lawn who was about 25, and the guy's like, you've done a great job, come and mow my other property's lawns. He's like, how do you have so many properties? He's like, the first one's the hardest. And so that really intrigued him. So, we kind of went on this path of going to all of those 2-hour free seminars. Being the good engineer and researcher, I read like 120 books. And it got to the stage that when I was listening to everyone's talk, what fascinated me was the people who got it wrong. So the mistakes they made, they might be, I made all this money and then I got divorced and lost it all. I'm like, a man is not a financial plan. I'll buy properties in my own name until I can't. And Or they'd say, I got ripped off by a spruiker. The person who was educating me was also telling me to run to the back of the room to buy the off the plan, ... I was like, okay, don't buy a property off people who are telling you to run to the back of the room. And so I was learning the mistakes that people were making. Or I renovated this house that was, really needed it, but I made no money. I'm like, okay, so there's more to renovation than just renovating something that needs to be done up. And so I really built up this, I guess, curiosity of hacking the system. And I thought, well, if I could bring my risk assessment knowledge that I'd learned in explosives and de-risk property investing, how good would that be? So I thought, if I can look at the 10-year growth of the suburbs that outperformed the others over the last 10 years and see what they had in common, and then use that to invest in the future, and then de-risk based on things like vacancy rates and use maybe the ripple effect of the pricing of how suburbs would be affected in capital growth, then I could really property investing. And so I brought all that together, and it became my Trident strategy. And my husband and I, kind of doubled down on the research and, did a 10K kind of ring around Melbourne and knocked out all the suburbs we couldn't afford, came down to 3 suburbs, understood the demographics, which is really a key to, I guess, my methodology, and understanding who were the renters, who were the buyers, what was motivating the prices in the area, and then looking at the past growth and the effect of, pricing pressure for future growth, and we bought. And so, for me, getting into property was the first start, and the first property was really successful, and then we went on and used equity to buy others. And then I thought, I've got to teach my friends how to do this. So my friends are all $1 million property portfolios and, have that luxury and were set up. And I thought, I need new friends. And so I'd run out of friends. And then I thought, how can I share this strategy and democratize wealth with understanding how to buy and where to buy strategically and having, a methodology to it. And the only way I could get professional indemnity insurance was to be a mortgage broker. And, rather than being on mine sites, setting up a blast, and having some downtime and running toolbox talks for the miners and the shop firers on how to buy property, I thought I've got to be able to talk to more people. And so I set up the mortgage business, Investors Choice Mortgages, back in 2005. And the whole premise behind that was that, finance was a leveraging tool to be able to get into property, but property was the vehicle to allow people to have wealth. And so I wanted to connect the dots. So I was more interested in what people's vision of what they wanted to create and why they wanted wealth and what they were trying to do. And then I would then create, the path for them to do that.
I want to talk about the psychology of wealth creation aspects in a moment, because I know you've done a lot of deep thinking on that subject and why people succeed and others don't and so on. But before we do that, tell us a bit about your first property, because I always like to ask people, how did you even get on the ladder on the first rung? What was the property you bought? Where was it? How hard was it to save the deposit?
Yeah. Well, it was back in the day when you could actually take your money out of super. So I had spent very effectively most of my income, and I knew that I needed to get in, and all I needed was that 5% deposit. So I had the grand old total of $45,000, of which $25,000 went to stamp duty straight up. So, thank you very much, Victorian government. My husband and I, we had those 3 suburbs. We walked the suburbs. We got to know the market. For every 10 properties that we looked at to buy, we would look at one to rent and see how the rental manager was presenting the property, talking about the property and what people's questions were. So we wanted to know our market, and I wanted to be able to de-risk the property investing. So I wanted to be able to have 3 ways to make money. So that was the Trident strategy: buy below the market by understanding the market and understanding how to negotiate and put in offers. Be able to renovate the property to have a higher and better value. So for every $1 that I spent, I'd create at least $2. So I needed to have that pricing discrepancy within that suburb of proof of the difference of renovated and unrenovated price points. And I needed to have growth, because growth was going to be able to be the thing that would allow me to exit the market at a point in time. So, we looked at 3 suburbs, Carlton and Collingwood and Fitzroy, and really intimately got to know those suburbs. In the end, we ended up buying 2 properties in the one bill of sale, but on separate titles. And my side was worth $425,000. So I had to go in with a 5% deposit. And I knew if I waited till I had a 20% deposit, that property would be $650, and I'd be buying the equivalent of a $250,000 property at that point in time. So I went in with the mortgage insurance, the 5%. I then borrowed $50,000 as a personal loan to do the renovation. And 6 months later, that $425,000 property was worth $700,000. My husband had the property next door, did the same thing, refinanced to an 80% loan to value ratio, still pulled out $100,000 or so, and went to Sydney and started buying. So my employer moved me up there. And so, we really had to finish that renovation off quickly, which then taught me a whole lot about renovation and the value of your time and money compared to having an expert do the painting, for instance. And went to Sydney, bought properties, and, that was the start. And, other than that $45,000, I never put any of my own money into the property purchase again. And, we bought 7 investment properties within quite a short period of time.
You mentioned your husband, Todd, there a couple of times, and I know he's hugely talented in his own right. And I think it must be great to have a partner who's on the same page as you and sharing that journey. I've always, having followed your work over the years, always admired your confidence to look at long-term trends and prices and not get too weighed down in the short-term noise of the market and media commentary. I want to explore today particularly renovation, because I know that's one of your areas of expertise alongside mortgage financing and where to buy, but particularly renovation, because that's something a lot of people love the idea of getting into renovating, but they don't really know where to start. Before we do that, talk to us a bit about what you've learned in recent years about the psychology of wealth creation, because we all know that life doesn't go up in a straight line. The real world doesn't work like that. Good and bad stuff happens to everybody. But in some ways, it seems to be more important how you respond to the adverse outcomes and results rather than what happens to you. But why do some people self-sabotage and other people just seemingly go from one success to the next?
Yeah, look, I've really been a student of success, from the very beginning. And I hacked my way into trying to work out how to demystify property investing, and I hacked my way into setting up a business with my mortgage broking business by, having 30 questions and asking 30 mortgage brokers, all their KPIs so I could set up a best possible company from the start. And so I've always been into this idea of hacking success. And what has fascinated me over the last, 16, 17 years of working with property investors is that why some get it and some don't. So I've always had mentors. And so a mentor for the mortgage broking business. And then I thought, I really wanted to double down on the education business. I could only find someone in the United States who really was doing it with integrity and authenticity. So I flew backwards and forwards and was mentored by someone in the States to set up the Your Property Success business. And every time I'd launch a course, Ultimate Guide to Renovation or Location Masterclass, I was always getting feedback from people of how they were doing it. And the industry standard is that 5% of people complete a course, and that just wasn't acceptable to me. I just wanted to have the best possible outcome for people and make it so engaging and easy to understand that people got to the end and got the completion and then the result. And so, for me, when I was doing this, I was providing the courses and providing the suburb selector software with all the information on all the suburbs in Australia and telling them how to use it. But some people would get it and some people wouldn't. And so I really doubled down about 4 years ago. If I was going to hack this success for someone, how would I do it? Well, I would take someone through the process. So I started my mentoring, only a very small group of people, 6 to 10 a year. And I was really fascinated with where things fell down for them. And, when I was looking at, so in my community I have about 30,000 people, and I look at, people who are completing things and not, and it really came down to the fact that, if you drew a graph and you had an X and Y axis, and on the Y axis you had wisdom and knowledge, on the X axis you had action. There were some people taking lots of action with not a lot of knowledge, NRAS, NDIS, buying in the States, flipping or subdivision, or things that could be a little bit riskier without knowledge, gambling. And then we had people in the top, left quadrant, which were kind of lots of courses, lots of knowledge, but never actually pulled the trigger. And they're kind of like the dreamers. We have the cynics in the bottom left corner, which is kind of the people who are like never going to learn anything, never going to do anything, but they're always going to criticize. And the hard thing is often they're our family and friends because they want to protect us and they've heard the horror stories. And then we have the achievers. They do the knowledge part and then they apply it and then they learn a bit more and then they apply it. And that works, but not everyone falls into that category. So when I was working with even my mentoring students, there was a couple of them last year, and they knew what, we do a visualization of what the end result is that they want to create. And it's not about 10 properties. It's not about a portfolio that generates $100,000 a year. It's about spending more time with the family, creating podcasts for doctors that are facing burnout. It's about, creating a space for women of domestic violence, having somewhere safe to go. So, we work out what that true vision is that they really want to do, work out where they are now, and then create the bridge to achieve that. And, the funny thing is with those sessions, often people are closer than they think, or they don't need as much money as they think they need to have the life that they want. And so, I was really fascinated with that. But, with a couple of my mentoring students last year, they weren't happy with their jobs or where they were. And I thought, I need to find a way to, get them over these limiting beliefs that they have. Maybe I'm not worthy, or I'm not good enough, or rich people are bad, or whatever that is. I found a course. I was reading a book called The Magician's Way by William Whitecloud. There was a free course going on. I accompanied the two of them on that course, and I could see these profound realizations of what was holding them back. And there might have been something from childhood that, people were saying, you're going to lose all your money if you invest or you have loans or whatever their experience had been. And I could see this incredible, realization and then acceptance of what they wanted. And then they connected to the vision that they wanted, and they've achieved that success. And so, when I look at people and the psychology of money, often people have this negative vision of, I want to be wealthy. And all your brain hears is, well, obviously I'm not wealthy now. And you're just reinforcing that every day. And so, I can see how, some of the affirmations and the things that people talk about, The Secret, all of that, why it doesn't work, because people are really trying to separate themselves from a position of lack rather than concentrating on the vision that they want and the true vision of what the legacy they want intergenerationally for their children, more time at home. And if you think about divorce, the number one reason people divorce is because of financial problems. And, if you can take financial problems off the table and have more parents sticking around and having bigger and better conversations with their kids, that's why I do what I do. And so just this concept of hacking into the success of the mindset of the investor and understanding why people aren't, really pulling the trigger or getting it right or becoming susceptible to FOMO. What is that? And then making it obvious to them and then working through it and then getting onto the path. So they get rid of the money problems and they have that Forrest Gump moment where you go to the letterbox and you read the letter that says you don't need to worry about money anymore. And they're like, yeah, that's what I want. So people can get on with life and really do what they truly want to do.
Do you want to save on buyer's agent fees? You could save thousands with Buyers Buyers. As Australia's most extensive network of buyer's agents, we can lock in highly competitive prices. Plus, our national network of buyer's agents are some of the best in the business. So get the Buyers Buyers advantage and talk to us today. Call 1-800-975-051 or visit buyersbuyers.com.au.
As you've identified there's underlying beliefs that you need to tap into, and then I guess understanding your own personality type and your goals and your vision. I guess as you pointed out there, it's really a combination of the right knowledge and actually taking action. And I think, as you said, having the right mentors and a a peer group as well that helps you along, because I've often heard it said that you become the sum of the 6 people you spend the most time with, or whatever the phrase is. And I do believe there's an element of truth in that. And I think as well, the old 80-20 rule, just even a few big good decisions can make a huge amount of difference to your future outcomes. So, Jane, what I'd really like to explore with you today, of all the different things that we could get into, given your massive skill set, is particularly renovation. Again, lots of people come to me and say, I'd like to renovate properties. There's lots of shows on the TV about renovation, and people feel like it's something they'd like to get into. Now, I've done a bit of renovating over the years. I've bought a unit and I've put in a new kitchen and a bathroom, and I've done a carpet and maybe a repaint, and then another time I bought a terrace and refurbished it. But there's never been any sort of systematic approach to it. I've sort of had this general idea that if you spend $1, you want to try and make $1.50 or $2 back. But I've, hand on heart, I've never really sat down and measured the results or taken any kind of systematic approach to work out, well, where is the best value add? How do you engage with tradies, get the right materials and all of this stuff, which I know you've put a lot of time and thought and experience into over the years. So for somebody who doesn't know much about renovation, they're interested in the idea of it, what are some of the most profitable, simple renovation strategies that people can take? Should you buy, renovate and sell property, or do you encourage people to buy, renovate and then hold on to them? Talk to us a bit about that.
Wow, so many questions. I think, look, if I really started at the top, the biggest mistake that I see that people make in renovation is they find a property that looks a bit run down and they can see a vision and they start renovating it. You really need to actually buy the property in the right area. So, for instance, where there was pricing points or differentials between the unrenovated and the renovated property. So I wanted to make sure that if I bought at $500,000 and I spent $50,000 on renovating it and it held, the whole cost was $6,000 and I wanted to make $2 of every $1, that, I really had a property that was worth over $630,000 at the end when I had my profit and costs, etc., put into it. There's not a lot in the lower price points of properties in suburbs that, at $400,000 that are selling properties at, $520,000. And he had the belief that you really had to start around $600,000-$700,000 price point in the suburbs medium. Now, that's obviously moved on these days because obviously, you buy at $1 million and you spend $100,000 on a reno and you want to make $2 out of it and, you're covering your costs at the period of time. Finding a suburb that has $1 million properties in it and $1.25 million properties in it is a lot easier. So it's higher, it's better at that price point, but it doesn't mean it's not impossible at lower price points. And it really comes down to understanding that discrepancy and then doubling down on those suburbs. And then you get to the property that you look at and you're like, there is an opportunity here to, really, as you said, do the big ticket items. And I think about, let me think of an analogy here. If I think about the big ticket items, it's almost like dating, right? So you meet someone, first impressions count, like those first few seconds, just like dating really counts. So if I think of that, it's like pulling up to the property, the facade, the look of the property, that's where a lot of decisions are made on, buying a property or renting a property. And then we get into the real heart of it, where you're spending most of your time. And, if you're dating, you really want to make sure that you have an engaging, personality that represents, the person. And that's really like the heart of the house, which is the kitchen, right? So we get into the kitchen. And just like dating, we need to have a bit of makeup to look good. So, the painting and the floorboards and things that are done as an ancillary to really doing up the property. And then, we get down to the mechanics of it, which is really the bathroom, and the bathroom's the next thing. So I'm doing this on the fly here, but, if I think about it, it really is kind of like that dating experience, the first impressions, creating the sanctuary or the impression that you want through the painting and the flooring, the kitchen is definitely in the heart of the property, and then the bathroom is, where you can always add value as well. So that would be the areas that I'd add value, but starting with the right suburb and then starting with the typical property. There's no point buying a one-bedroom unit in an area where it's not the typical property and the most of the market want a 3-bedroom house. You may not be able to rent it out and you may not be able to sell it. So it doesn't matter how pretty your renovation looks, you're not getting the outcome. So I'm always trying to de-risk things, the typical property, using data today. I can get from the 15,655 suburbs using, the data kind of driven information down to the suburbs that have the pricing pressure and less than 3% vacancies and, more than, say, 60 sales and, having more than 30% renters. There's only like 260 suburbs in Australia that fit this profile. And then you get down to where the renters want to live. So I use census data that tells me the streets where the renters want to live. So I'm de-risking the whole time. And then the typical property, it's a 3-bedroom house, which is typically most of Australia. So you now start with the right fundamentals, and then you look at that renovation strategy and that, the trident strategy, plan A, B, and C. If you kind of stuff up one thing, you've got at least that growth area to kind of rescue you in the long term. So, that for me is renovation is an absolute key to pushing up the rent, keeping good tenants, creating equity that you can then pull out to buy for the next property, which is what we did with our properties. And, I look at, the renovation as a strategy. And, when I look at a lot of the students that have been through my courses and methodology, those that kind of just follow the bouncing ball, I remember one student, for instance, he was like late 50s and his daughter got him the course and he's like, I'm not clever enough to actually improvise this. I'm just going to do what you say. And he bought this great property in Melbourne. He took some long service leave. In 10 days, he spent like $17,000. The valuer came back and it went up by $70,000. And he thought he was like a superhero. It was just like great success story. But the real success was 2 years later, it was worth $200,000 more. And he could pull the equity and buy another property. So he went to Brisbane and bought a property. And, those properties became a foundation of wealth that he didn't think that he could have in the family. Subsequently, things happened and family breakdown. They had to dissolve assets. And he contacted me recently and just said the equity that was gained in those 2 properties allowed him and his wife to start lives again. Whereas if they didn't have that, they would have really been, out on the streets kind of thing. And that's what property, making the right kind of decisions can get people, is that fundamental kind of buffer. If things do go wrong, they've got something to protect them. But if they go right as we plan, it makes for a comfortable retirement. Or like, as you said, with my husband, stopped at working at 40 in, corporate world and started painting, following his dream.
Oh, you should definitely finish with a plug for some of Todd's work, because I see it, you share sometimes on Facebook. I have to blink sometimes because they're so unbelievably lifelike, some of their portraits and so on, particularly one of Nathan Lyon I enjoyed a little while back. I think on your points on renovation there, there's that market timing element and looking for suburbs in the right stage of the property cycle. Some of the best results I've seen in Brisbane, which is the market I know best, I guess, has often been in some of those landlocked suburbs, but particularly good school zones. I think if people buy a nice flat block and renovate the house, that would appeal to a family in something like the Ironside catchment, where there's a lot of competition from parents, and you can suddenly just see the price of the property take a big step up. Those are some of the best results that I've seen, where the family just thinks it's the right school zone in the catchment, nice flat block of land where I can see the kids out the back, things like that. But obviously the cycle moves on and the best opportunities today might be elsewhere, as you mentioned. One of the things I noticed just reading the news, and I suppose just from what people tell me and so on, I saw that the cost of construction in the third quarter of 2021 was up about 7%. We haven't seen a jump like that in a long time. Obviously, around the world, we've got all these supply chain disruptions at the moment, and the cost of materials and tradies seems to have suddenly got very expensive. Do you think that people can still renovate profitably in the current market? Or would you look to acquire a site now, maybe renovate down the track?
Yeah, I think that there is a misconception that when you do buy with a renovation strategy, you have to renovate straight away. Kick the tenant out and let's get going. And the reality is the strategy can actually be invoked at any time. I bought this little property in Darlington near Newtown in Sydney in 2002 for $427,000. And I could not afford to renovate it at the time. And, 2009, I managed to get in and do the kitchen, put some, skylights in. But I held that property and I knew that the growth was going to carry it through. And it's like, I don't know, worth 1.3 or something now. But all of the properties that I've bought, I'd known that the strategy of renovation was going to add value to it. And like a little unit that I've got in the eastern suburbs in Sydney, we were looking at the properties at the time because we were bored. We just finished a renovation, hadn't seen our friends for 6 months, and we thought, well, what else do you do? Let's go and have a look at some properties. So looked at this tiny little unit, as comparable to all the rest, around 420. After a couple of weeks, it had dropped to 380. We offered 325. They said yes. We went in with a 10-day renovation, $10,000, and had it revalued at 450 3 months later. So, that was kind of like an in, renovate, and out. But, a lot of the times, I look at the increase of prices at the moment and, the limitation of getting trades in as well, is really difficult. Just having lived through Melbourne's lockdowns, 260 days lockdowns over 2 years, our dishwasher broke down and we had to wait 3 months before we could actually get someone to put a dishwasher in. So, that's such a simple little task. Manage a whole renovation through that, is really difficult as well. So, to your point, distribution and supply has created some real pricing pressure and inflation around the costs of renovation goods, the bushfires and timber, all of these things have affected it. Renovation is still a valid strategy, but I would say that, if you're going to buy, renovate, sell really quickly, it's really hard to do it in a market that is changing and we don't know what will happen. I have some very optimistic impressions of what immigration will do in coming years to the market as well. And I love looking at the property market at the moment because for the first time ever, all of the capital cities are going up and all the regions are going up. Often what we try to do is predict where to buy based on an area. And at the moment, we've got them all on the same level. So we can actually see the ones that are coming off quickly and we can see the ones that are going to go back to their set point. Just like when you're trying to lose weight, your body goes back to a set point. I have a belief that, most of the areas do go back to a set point. And, to your point, I think that's what we're seeing. We start seeing the Perths and the Darwins come off and we start seeing the regional unlandlocked areas come off. I've always had, I know Brisbane's your stomping ground, but I've always looked at Brisbane at the 10-year growth of being 2.5% compared to the 6s and 7s in Sydney and Melbourne. And I would normally say, that's kind of the set point. That's where it's going to get to. And my research on the effects of Commonwealth Games and Olympic Games in other areas and what that would be doesn't prove that there's going to be a lot of growth around that because you already have, right, the infrastructure. But the thing that really fascinates me is that I now got a lot of anecdotal evidence of people who are splitting their family up because of kids that have maybe health or mental health issues, and the mum and the kids are moving to Brisbane while the dad and the older kids are finishing school off. And there's this movement to Queensland because of the way that the political system has handled lockdowns. And I think that is going to actually be the one circuit breaker that changes all of the narrative that we can see across the data points, that Brisbane will actually continue and not go back to its set point of what it's done over the last 10 years. So, it's such exciting times.
Yeah, it's been a funny one. I think Brisbane had a big boom through the mining boom years, a bit like Perth did, I guess, and then it kind of peaked out after the financial crisis, and then not really that much in the way of action until relatively recently. But I guess the thing with Brisbane, it's always been a funny sort of a multi-speed market. It's not a mature capital city like Melbourne or Sydney, and you've certainly got flood areas that have been hot and cold, so to speak, depending on years of the floods. And then obviously there's a lot of overbuilding in the inner suburbs. So there have been some areas that have done well, others that have done terribly. And it kind of averages out, as you said, over 10 years, some fairly modest results. But definitely noticed there's been people moving up from Sydney and Melbourne. I think it's a combination of lifestyle, affordability, more flexible working. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely one where get some local expertise there because, there are some areas that have done much better than others. Useful tip you mentioned there, if you can't afford to renovate immediately, you can buy properties with that future value add potential, almost like equity on ice, if you like. There used to be a TV show in the UK, I've got no idea if it's still going, where there was a lady called Sarah Beanie who used to do all these renovations. I can't remember the name of the show, but I remember often at the end of the program, they'd revisit the renovation at the end. And quite often people had made just as much from the capital growth as they had from the renovation. And so what would you say to somebody who is thinking about a career in renovation? Because I think sometimes people see these shows and they think, I'm going to buy a property, renovate it, sell it, and then go on to the next and the next. My approach has always been buy somewhere. If I can renovate and add some value, I'll do that, but I just hold on to it and just figure that the capital growth will do a lot of the long or the heavy lifting over the long run. Do you have a thought on which is the better way to go for most people, or do you think some people can be more successful at flipping?
Look, I think flipping is really fraught with a lot of issues, and I think it's like chapter 13 for no better reason flips that flop in my book, because it concerns me people don't do the numbers. And if you're going to do it, you have to choose that strategy to start with, because it's a whole different area in the suburb you're going to buy. If you're buying to hold, you're where the renters want to be. If you're buying to sell to an owner-occupier, you need to be buying in different streets in the suburb. So we can get down using census to that information. But I think a lot of people, I remember doing one of my strategy calls with a mortgage client, and they're like, okay, we are so good at renovating properties. We're going to give up our jobs and we're going to do it. And I said, well, tell me about the last 3 you've done. They said, well, we've done it with our homes. And so we went through how much they had spent, how much they bought the property for, and how much they'd sold. And then I applied the capital growth to that property, which was actually the same sale price. They'd actually made nothing out of renovating, and they were about to give up their jobs, right? I'm like, guys, whatever. So, I think there is, you watch The Block now, and it's funny, when The Block started, I don't know how many years ago, we actually looked at that first block of units to buy that then subsequently got sold to The Block. Now, they did like millions of dollars worth of foundational work before they actually then handed it over to the people to do the renovations. And we were talking like sub $1 million. Now you look at The Block, the properties are selling for $3-4 million. That's the kind of discrepancy that is, the price point that you need to be able to flip in that high end. And yes, it's a TV show, but I think it gives people an unrealistic expectation of what is possible. And, I've worked with some very strategic flippers, and often people, come into my renovation course thinking they want to flip, and they look at those modules and then they realise that they're actually going to make more money from the growth. And renovation is a strategy to, add equity and access equity and, have better tenants and put rent up. But it's really, one part of the strategy. And I think that flipping is fraught with danger if you don't do it well. There are people who do it well, but it isn't the norm in my experience.
If I'm looking at you blankly on the video, Jane, it's because I've never seen an episode of The Block. I'm not, truth be told, not planning to either. I literally don't even watch TV these days. I tend to get more information from podcasts and online and so on. And I've never even seen an episode. I see people tweeting about it, but I've never tuned in. So
I have to confess that I usually tune in probably once every 4 or 5 years, and it's only for the auction. I just want the end result and see what they've done for the creation. I'm not interested in the saga and the drama.
Probably a better use of your time, I might think. But obviously next year is going to be an interesting one because it's federal election. Borders are reopening. We've seen all of this new detached homes being approved all around the country. So presumably a lot of building going on. So loads of different moving parts. What do you think the outlook's going to be for the housing market? potentially rising interest rates as well at some point. On the back of that, what do you think might be the useful strategies, particularly for investors and people wanting to renovate?
I'm really optimistic, and that's not just from, rose-coloured glasses. Like last year in April, I stopped all of my mentoring students from doing anything. I was watching the UK, the US, the China, the Italian markets of post-lockdown to see, when it was right to pull the trigger, and I had them pull the trigger in September. So I'm not like every time's a great time to buy. I think there's some of these kind of strange things that we've been through recently that we need to be mindful of. I always believe you buy the best possible property you can buy when you can afford to buy it. Don't try to time the market. And I had a mortgage client years ago who told me that $600,000 for the median price point in Sydney was just way too expensive. She's going to wait until it drops, and she's still waiting. And, so I'm really around the fact that don't try to time the market, but let's be mindful of the fact that, as you point out, things are a little bit different. We hold our wealth as Australians in property. We have been through a period of time where we have grown our wealth extraordinarily for those who've owned property, but also in savings. We haven't been spending money. There's an amazing optimism, and, the idea is that we need immigration for the property market to be dynamic. But look what's happened. The property market's going crazy and there's no new people. We have like 180,000 immigrants come to Australia every year. They're talking about doubling that. Will they turn it on sooner rather than later? Who knows? But when they do come, we've still got the banks that are predicting 8 to 10% growth next year. And, on the median house property in Australia, that's an extra $80,000. That's like an income for someone in a year that they could make if they're in the market and buying strategically in the right areas and for the demographic. But, when I look at 2023, we've all lived through, interest rates of 6 to 7%. And some people can remember that, the big numbers of the early years. That wasn't that long ago. And, we're having a little bit of wage growth and, yes, inflation's going up. It was, all of those kind of things, and interest rates going up. But the banks are assessing you at a 3% higher, servicing rate. Now, that's like 12 rate rises. And we know that the bank's going to put their rates up before the RBA does, because the RBA has to control the economy for the entire economy, not just for property prices. But think about all this, let's say we double immigration, or we don't. Let's say we just have 180,000 people who come to Australia. They're going to come looking for jobs. They're going to go to the major metropolitan areas, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, maybe Adelaide also with, their new emerging kind of tech intelligence space there as well. They're going to look for these areas that are safe and secure, the sanctuary of the island of Australia and how we've treated COVID. They're going to work for a year, and then they're going to be able to buy a property. So, 223, they come to Australia, 224, they start buying. So, the people who are a lot cleverer than me are thinking there's still 8 to 10% growth in the market next year. It may plateau. It's not going to go back in 2023 because we're going to have all these renters turn up and the investors are going to go, hey, yields are great. And so we're going to see rents go up. And then 2024, they're going to start buying. I think the first home buyers, I do feel a little sorry for them, but I do also, I'm not sure if you know this, but, 2 years ago, I had a brain tumor. And as I was in recovery after they just finished the surgery, I came out. They put your morphine on you for half an hour and then they say, what do you do? And I said, I help everyday Australians create financial security through residential property, democratising wealth. And this lady said, I'm about to buy my first property, my first home buyer, I'm a nurse and, I'm buying this house and land package. I'm like, no, supply and demand. Is this going to be your forever home? She's like, no. I'm like, okay, let's think like an investor. So I was talking to her about, where to buy and how to buy. And she's like, wait a second, there's 2 other nurses. So I ran this masterclass half an hour after brain surgery for first home buyers. And like in the subsequent 10 days, I was like, you know what? I need to create the first home buyers show to really teach first home buyers. So whilst I was in surgery, whilst I was in hospital, I created that because I really think that if we think strategically about where to buy, this is a great opportunity. And maybe there's fractional investing and investing with other people or mum and dad coming in and guaranteeing loans, etc. And I'm seeing more of that. But, the first home loan deposit scheme, I'm seeing, I've had clients this week from Tamworth to Melbourne being able to secure a property and get on the path to wealth with really good strategic decisions of where they've bought using their first home loan deposit scheme. So, I'm just so optimistic about the market, and I'm really optimistic about how people can actually create a foundation for amazing wealth for themselves if they buy strategically in the next 12 months.
Yeah, fantastic advice. Now, as I feared, Jane, we could talk all day about this, and we haven't even touched on things like your mortgage broking skills, construction loans, financing, all of that side of things. But sadly, we're short on time. So last two questions. Firstly, what's the end game look like for you? What's retirement going to be like? Or are you just going to keep working until the end? And finally, if people want to know more about your property success, your books, where to find your commentary, your newsletters, podcasts, and all the rest of it, where can people go to find out more?
So the end game, we really had a vision of what the life was we wanted to create. My husband wanted to stop work and paint. I wanted to be able to help people create financial security. We stopped buying property in 2006. I'm facilitating and part of hundreds of conversations every month with people in property and talking to people every day about it and helping them facilitate across Australia purchases. But, we're good. We're really good. And, our property portfolio went up last year, and that's great. And, it looks after itself, which is great. And, so I'm really committed, my end game, I'm on a number of advisory boards for new prop tech companies that really excite me, that can, help people strategically buy property, a clever way and democratize, that wealth exchange so that it's not just the rich getting richer. I'm looking at other things. It distresses me that, there's an opportunity for people to invest, but maybe they don't have the borrowing capacity, but they have $5,000 to $10,000. So I'm looking at impact funds where people can make an investment in residential property that's actually doing good, like, maybe assisting people that need to have, sanctuary and shelter, etc. So from an abundance point of view, helping them, but also, doing it profit with purpose, right? So conscious capitalism. So I'm looking at that. And I'm also in the process, I've got a development team. I just love people's stories. And I think it's important for us to be able to share and learn from our family and create a history and a legacy of the stories so we can pass them on. So I'm in the process of creating a platform for people to be able to share their stories with family and friends. So that's pretty exciting too. So yeah, lots of things. But for me, I really just love the conversation about property being a vehicle for people to create the vision that they want and working with them with what that vision is and, helping them facilitate that, be it however I can contribute. So I do a lot of things. I have Your Property Success with the education. I have the mentoring. I have Investors Choice Mortgages. I have the book, and people are always confused about where to find everything. So I've just got one website at the moment, janeslacksmith.com.au. Go there, you can check things out. And I'm in the process of raising $20,000 for Kids Helpline. So if people want to make a donation, they can get access to one of my courses, which is usually $697. And we're at $17,500. And for every $10,000, a new counsellor gets trained up. And, at the moment, there's kids waiting every single day that can't get through, that are really at risk, and we need to be helping the kids at home. So I'm really committed to being able to assist that.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jane. As I said, we could probably talk for another couple of days on all of your expertise, but we'll certainly have to wrap it up there. So thank you so much for joining. And if you want to find out more, you can go to Jane's website there. Cheers, Jane. I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks for listening to Pete's Property Podcast, powered by Buyers. Don't forget to subscribe and join us next time as Pete chats all things property with a new guest. And just a reminder that the information provided in this podcast is general advice only and doesn't take into account your personal financial situation or needs. You should always consult a licensed professional to discuss your individual personal circumstances.